As world leaders arrive in Germany for one of the most closely watched security gatherings of the year, the atmosphere feels heavier than usual. Motorcades move through tightly secured streets, cameras flash outside the venue, and inside, behind closed doors, conversations are unfolding that could influence the next decade of global politics. This is not just another diplomatic event filled with speeches and handshakes. It is a moment where uncertainty, shifting alliances, military calculations, and economic pressures are all colliding at once. Europe finds itself at the center of this storm, balancing its historical alliance with the United States, its geographic proximity to Russia, and its growing economic relationship with China. The question hanging over the conference halls is simple yet profound. Is the world entering a new phase of geopolitical division? The war in Ukraine remains the dominant issue shaping nearly every conversation. For Europe, this conflict is not distant. It is happening on its doorstep. Governments across the continent are reassessing their defense budgets, military readiness, and energy strategies. The initial unity that followed the outbreak of war has evolved into a more complex discussion about sustainability. How long can military and financial support continue? How should Europe prepare if the conflict becomes frozen rather than resolved? There is a growing recognition that this war has reshaped Europe's security architecture permanently. Defense spending has increased in multiple countries, and long-standing assumptions about peace and stability have been challenged. For many European policymakers, the conflict has become a wake-up call that strategic complacency is no longer affordable. At the same time, the United States continues to play a decisive role. Washington remains a central pillar of NATO's military strength and intelligence coordination. However, domestic political debates inside America create uncertainty about long-term commitments. European leaders are quietly asking whether they must prepare for a future in which U.S. support fluctuates depending on political cycles. This does not necessarily mean a break in the transatlantic relationship, but it does mean that Europe is thinking more seriously about strategic autonomy. Discussions at the conference include increasing joint European defense production, strengthening rapid response forces, and improving coordination across EU member states. The goal is not to replace the United States, but to ensure that Europe can act decisively if required. Russia's position also weighs heavily on the discussions. From Moscow's perspective, the conflict represents more than a territorial dispute. It is seen as part of a broader confrontation with Western influence. Russian military posture, energy diplomacy, and strategic messaging all signal that the Kremlin is prepared for a prolonged standoff. This reality forces European leaders to think in long-term scenarios rather than short-term fixes. Sanctions, energy diversification, and military deterrence are no longer temporary policies. They are evolving into structural elements of Europe's strategy. The conference provides a platform for aligning these approaches, ensuring that member states remain coordinated rather than fragmented. Beyond Europe and Russia, the global balance of power is shifting in ways that cannot be ignored. China's expanding economic reach and its growing military capabilities have introduced a new layer of strategic complexity. European nations are navigating a delicate balance, maintaining economic ties with Beijing while remaining aligned with Western security frameworks. Conversations in Germany reflect this duality. There is recognition that future geopolitical competition may not resemble the Cold War model of two rigid blocs, but rather a more fluid system of overlapping partnerships and rivalries. Indo-Pacific developments, trade routes, semiconductor supply chains, and technological competition are all interconnected with security policy. Leaders understand that economic resilience is now inseparable from military preparedness. Energy security remains another central theme. The disruption of traditional supply routes has accelerated Europe's efforts to diversify energy sources. Investments in renewables, liquefied natural gas infrastructure, and alternative suppliers have become strategic priorities rather than environmental talking points. The link between energy independence and national security is now explicit. Countries that once relied heavily on a single supplier are restructuring their entire energy frameworks. These decisions carry economic costs, but policymakers argue that long-term stability outweighs short-term financial pressures. NATO's future is also under careful examination. Enlargement, collective defense commitments, and modernization of military capabilities are active topics of discussions. Some analysts suggest that NATO is experiencing a revival, strengthened by renewed unity. Others warn that unity must be continuously reinforced through tangible commitments, not just political rhetoric. The conference serves as a space to coordinate messaging and reassure member states that collective defense remains credible. Military exercises, intelligence sharing, and defense innovation are being discussed not as symbolic gestures, but as practical necessities in an increasingly unpredictable environment. Meanwhile, the broader question of global blocs continues to surface. Are we witnessing the emergence of new alignments that will redefine international politics? Some nations are pursuing more independent foreign policies, refusing to align fully with either Western or Eastern power centers. Middle powers are leveraging strategic flexibility, seeking economic partnerships while avoiding military entanglements. This multipolar environment creates both opportunities and risks. On one hand, it reduces the likelihood of a rigid two-sided confrontation. On the other, it increases the potential for regional conflicts and fragmented alliances. Economic security, including currency stability and trade flows, is quietly part of the strategic conversation. Defense policy cannot be separated from financial systems. Sanctions regimes, reserve currencies, and commodity markets all influence geopolitical leverage. While military headlines dominate public attention, policymakers are equally focused on economic endurance. Long-term strategic competition requires resilient financial systems, stable supply chains, and diversified trade partnerships. As the conference progresses, there may not be dramatic announcements or breakthrough agreements. The significance of such gatherings often lies beneath the surface. Relationships are tested, assurances are exchanged, and red lines are clarified. The tone of conversations can reveal as much as official statements. What becomes clear is that the world is not returning to the pre-war status quo. Strategic trust has been altered, and security planning has entered a more cautious and calculated phase. In the end, the Germany Security Conference symbolizes a broader transition in global affairs. Europe is redefining its role. The United States is recalibrating its commitments within a changing domestic landscape. Russia remains assertive, and China's rise continues to reshape calculations worldwide. The future may not be defined by a single decisive event, but by a gradual restructuring of alliances, defense strategies, and economic priorities. Whether this leads to renewed stability or deeper fragmentation will depend on the decisions being shaped in rooms like these. One thing is undeniable: the global order is evolving, and the consequences of today's strategic choices will echo far beyond the walls of this conference. Please subscribe my channel for more videos like that. See you soon. Bye-bye.